My name is Amanda Wilson, and at 32 years old, I built a seven-figure business that my family knows nothing about. Every year, I go to our annual family dinner, smiling through their dismissive comments about my career. Last Christmas, I met my brother Thomas's fiancée Rachel for the first time. When asked what I did for a living, my mother laughed and said, "She's just a nobody with that internet thing she does." Nobody expected what happened when Rachel picked up her phone and Googled my name. Before I dive into my story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit the like and subscribe buttons if you've ever felt underestimated by the people who should believe in you most. Growing up in Brookline, a leafy, upper-middle-class suburb of Boston, I was always the odd one out in my family. Our house was a beautiful colonial with 4 bedrooms and a manicured lawn that my father Richard spent every Sunday perfecting. My mother Margaret, a hospital administrator with a psychology degree from Boston University, ran our household with the same efficiency she brought to her department. My brother Thomas, 2 years older than me, was the golden child from the moment he took his first steps at 10 months old, a full 2 months before I apparently did according to family lore. While other kids were playing with dolls, I was setting up little businesses. At 9, I made friendship bracelets and sold them to classmates for $2 each. By 12, I was crafting personalized birthday cards that parents would buy for $5 apiece. My parents saw these enterprises as cute hobbies, nothing more. "Amanda has such creative little projects," my mother would tell her friends, patting my head like I was showing off a drawing rather than turning a profit. Thomas, meanwhile, excelled at everything that mattered in my parents' eyes. He was captain of the debate team, played varsity baseball, and maintained a near-perfect GPA. When he was accepted to Harvard on early decision, my parents threw a party so extravagant you'd think he'd won a Nobel Prize. The house filled with relatives and family friends who toasted his success while I served punch and collected empty plates. "That's our boy," my father would beam, his arm around Thomas's shoulders. "Harvard Business School next, then Wall Street. He'll be running Goldman Sachs before he's 40. My mother had my future planned out too. "Amanda will make a wonderful lawyer," she'd tell anyone who would listen, though I'd never expressed any interest in law. "She argues about everything anyway." This always got a laugh, reducing my thoughtful questions and different perspective to mere contrarianism. When I chose to attend Northeastern instead of applying to Ivy League schools, you'd think I'd announced plans to join a circus. "Northeastern is perfectly adequate," my mother said with a tight smile at my high school graduation party. "And they do have that work-study program. Very practical for someone like Amanda." I majored in business despite pressure to pursue pre-law. My courses in entrepreneurship and digital marketing fascinated me, opening my eyes to possibilities my parents couldn't imagine. During my senior year, while Thomas was being wined and dined by investment banks, I developed a business plan for an online lifestyle brand and consulting business. After graduation, when I announced I was turning down a corporate marketing position to start my own company, my parents reacted as if I'd said I was moving to Mars. "This is absolutely irresponsible," my father declared over dinner. "You're throwing away your education on some internet pipe dream." "Sweetheart," my mother added with practiced patience, "everyone starts businesses these days. What makes you think you'll succeed when most fail within a year? The position at Deloitte offers benefits, Amanda. Health insurance. A retirement plan." "I've done the research," I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's a gap in the market for what I'm offering. My internships gave me connections, and I've already secured 3 clients to start." My father scoffed. "Clients who probably won't pay you half what you're worth." Meanwhile, Thomas is starting at Morgan Stanley with a 6-figure salary plus bonus. And that was how it always went. Thomas's traditional path was celebrated while my entrepreneurial journey was treated as a phase I needed to outgrow. The early years were hard, I won't lie. I worked from my tiny apartment, sometimes putting in 18-hour days. There were moments when I wondered if my parents were right, if I was foolish to reject security for possibility. The first year, I barely broke even. I ate ramen noodles and turned down social invitations to save money. When Thomas bought his first luxury car, I was still taking the tea everywhere. At family gatherings, I began dreading the inevitable questions. Still doing that website thing, my uncle would ask, not bothering to remember the name of my company. When are you going to get a real job? My aunt would chime in, as if I was playing house rather than running a legitimate business. Even as things improved financially, as I gained more clients and recognition in my industry, my family's perception remained frozen in time. At Thomas's 30th birthday party, my father introduced me to his golf buddy as our daughter who works with computers. By then, I had a team of 5 employees and had been featured in a national business magazine. After a while, I simply stopped sharing. When my business hit 6 figures in revenue, I celebrated with friends who understood the milestone's significance. When I landed my first national client, a major retail chain that brought in consistent 5-figure projects, I didn't mention it at Sunday dinner. When an industry publication named me one of 30 under 30 entrepreneurs to watch, I didn't bring the magazine to show my parents. Gradually, I built a life my family knew almost nothing about. I moved into a beautiful apartment in Boston's South End. I traveled internationally for business and pleasure. I cultivated friendships with other entrepreneurs who respected my work and understood my journey. In the digital space, I was recognized as an authority. I gave talks at conferences and was asked to contribute to major publications. But at family gatherings, I was still little Amanda with her cute internet hobby. The disconnect was surreal. I would go from a morning meeting where CEOs valued my input to a family dinner where I couldn't finish a sentence without being interrupted. Last Thanksgiving, I tried to tell my parents about a major partnership I'd secured with a household name brand. "That's nice, dear," my mother said, barely looking up from the turkey she was carving. "Did you hear that Thomas is being considered for junior partner?" At 34, the youngest in the firm's history, I stopped mid-sentence, swallowed my news along with my pride, and asked Thomas about his promotion prospects. His achievements always deserved center stage, while mine were relegated to the wings. Part of me wanted their validation, craved it even after years of independence. But another part of me had grown protective of my success, unwilling to subject it to their minimizing gaze. Why hand them something precious only to watch them dismiss its value? So I maintained my silence, building a life that flourished beyond their limited understanding of who I was and what I could achieve. The invitation came via group text in early December. Thomas had proposed to his girlfriend Rachel on Thanksgiving weekend, and our parents were hosting a formal dinner to welcome her to the family. The message included a professional engagement photo of Thomas in a tailored suit next to a beautiful woman with warm brown eyes and a brilliant smile. Even through the screen, I could sense her intelligence. Sunday at 5. Cocktails followed by dinner. Business casual. Rachel is excited to meet everyone properly. I stared at my phone, feeling the familiar mix of obligation and dread. Another family gathering where I'd be relegated to the background, my achievements invisible next to Thomas's charmed life. Still, I was genuinely curious about the woman who had captured my brother's heart. Before responding, I did what any millennial would do. I Googled her. Rachel Bennett, pharmaceutical researcher with a PhD from Johns Hopkins, currently working for a biotech company developing cancer treatments. Her LinkedIn profile was impressive, listing publications in scientific journals and speaking engagements at medical conferences. She seemed accomplished, serious about her career. I wondered what she saw in Thomas. Not that he wasn't successful and handsome, but he'd always dated women who were pretty but unambitious, content to orbit his rising star. Rachel seemed different. She had her own trajectory, her own gravitational pull. I texted back my confirmation and spent the next week thinking about an appropriate engagement gift. Eventually, I settled on a weekend getaway package to a luxury resort in Vermont where Thomas had mentioned wanting to try the ski slopes. It was expensive but well within my budget thanks to a major contract I'd recently signed with a beauty brand expanding their digital presence. The morning of the dinner, I stood before my closet contemplating what to wear. I needed something that would make me feel confident but wouldn't draw accusations of showing off. I settled on a simple black dress with a statement necklace, professional but not boring. As I applied my makeup, my phone rang. It was Stephanie, my closest friend since college and one of the few people who truly understood my family dynamic. "What's your emotional preparation strategy for tonight?" she asked after I answered. "The usual. Low expectations. Deep breathing. Escape plan in place." "Good. And remember, their opinion of you isn't your reality. You're crushing it, Amanda. Don't let them make you forget that." "Thanks, Steph." Part of me is tempted to just lay it all out there tonight. Tell them about the Evans contract. Show them the revenue projections for next quarter. You know how that will go. Stephanie replied gently. "Your mom will find a way to change the subject to Thomas, and your dad will make some comment about how it's not too late to get a job at one of his friends' firms." She was right, of course. I'd been having variations of the same conversation with my family for a decade. Nothing had changed except me. I was no longer the insecure recent graduate desperate for their approval. I had built something valuable on my own terms. "You're right," I said. "I'm not going to set myself up for disappointment. Tonight is about Thomas and Rachel anyway." After we hung up, I gave myself a final look in the mirror. At 32, I looked good. Confidence had given me a poise that insecurity had masked in my 20s. Success had afforded me the ability to take care of myself, to dress well, to travel enough that my skin held a lingering tan even in December. The drive to my parents' house took 45 minutes, each mile bringing back memories. Passing my old high school. I remembered sitting in the guidance counselor's office as she recommended law schools while I daydreamed about building a brand. Driving by the local coffee shop where I'd spent countless hours developing my business plan on a second-hand laptop. Turning onto my parents' street lined with stately homes and expensive cars. Thomas's Tesla was already in the driveway, parked beside my father's Mercedes. My Honda, while nice, looked decidedly middle class in comparison. I took a deep breath, gathered the carefully wrapped engagement gift, and approached the front door. My finger hovered over the doorbell as I mentally rehearsed pleasant, non-committal responses to the inevitable questions about my work and relationship status. One thought kept circling in my mind. Would Rachel be different from the rest of them? Would she see me? Or would she too look past me to the golden sun who cast such a long shadow? With one more steadying breath, I pressed the doorbell, plastered on a smile, and prepared to play my usual role in the family drama. The heavy oak door swung open to reveal my mother, perfectly coiffed in a blue dress that matched her eyes. She held a glass of white wine and wore the practiced smile of a hostess. "Amanda, you made it," she said, giving me a brief side hug that barely made contact. "Everyone's already here." I stepped into the foyer, breathing in the familiar scent of lemon furniture polish and my mother's Chanel perfume. The house hadn't changed since my childhood. Same antique console table. Same Persian runner, same family photos arranged to document Thomas's journey from adorable toddler to accomplished adult. I noticed my graduation photo had been moved to a less prominent position to make room for Thomas's law school graduation portrait. From the living room came the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. I followed my mother through the archway to find a tableau of family connection that I observed like an anthropologist might study a foreign culture. Thomas stood by the fireplace, one arm around a woman I recognized as Rachel from her photos. She was even more striking in person, with intelligent eyes and an easy smile. My father was refreshing drinks while my aunt and uncle occupied the leather sofa, and my grandparents sat in matching wingback chairs. "Look who's here," my mother announced without enthusiasm. Thomas glanced up. "Hey sis, come meet Rachel." I crossed the room, gift in hand, feeling the familiar sensation of being both present and invisible. "Rachel, this is my sister Amanda," Thomas said. "Amanda, my fiancée Rachel." Rachel's smile seemed genuine as she extended her hand. "I've heard so much about you. Thomas says you're incredibly creative." Before I could respond properly, my mother inserted herself between us. "Rachel, you must meet Thomas's grandparents. They came all the way from Florida for this dinner." Just like that, I was sidelined. I placed my gift on the designated table, which was already piled with packages far larger than mine, and made my way to the bar cart to pour myself a glass of wine. For the next 30 minutes, I observed the family orbit around Thomas and Rachel like planets around twin suns. My father kept refilling their glasses. My mother kept introducing Rachel to relatives as the brilliant doctor who finally captured our Thomas's heart, and everyone kept asking questions about their relationship, their work, their plans. No one asked me a single question. I stood at the periphery, sipping my wine, occasionally catching Rachel's eye. She seemed to notice my isolation, once even attempting to include me in a conversation about Boston neighborhoods, but my mother quickly redirected the discussion to Thomas's new condo in Beacon Hill. When dinner was announced, I discovered the seating arrangement placed me between my grandfather, who was hard of hearing, and a second cousin I barely knew. Thomas and Rachel sat at the center of the table flanking my parents. The positions of honor. My father stood to give a toast, crystal glass raised. To Thomas and Rachel, a perfect match if ever there was one. Thomas, son, from the day you were born, we knew you were destined for greatness. And now you've found a partner worthy of your journey. Rachel, we are honored to welcome such an accomplished, brilliant woman into our family. May your lives together be as exceptional as you both are. Glasses clinked. I took a large swallow of wine. As the first course was served, a butternut squash soup that my mother knew was Thomas's favorite, conversation flowed around me like water around a stone. My cousin asked Thomas about market projections for the coming year. My uncle wanted Rachel's opinion on a new medical treatment he'd read about. My mother shared stories of Thomas's childhood achievements. I tried several times to join various conversations. When Rachel mentioned a recent conference in Chicago, I began to share my experience speaking at a marketing summit there last year. My father interrupted to ask Thomas about his upcoming business trip to the same city. When the topic turned to real estate prices, I offered insight about an emerging neighborhood based on recent client research. My aunt talked over me to ask Thomas and Rachel if they planned to buy a house before the wedding. Throughout the first course, I noticed Rachel watching these interactions with increasing awareness. Her eyes moved from speaker to speaker, noting the patterns of who was heard and who was ignored. Thomas, absorbed in his moment of glory, seemed oblivious to the dynamics. During a brief lull, Rachel directed a question specifically to me. Amanda, Thomas mentioned you work in digital marketing. What exactly does your company do? I felt a momentary spark of hope that someone at the table was actually interested in my life. Well, I started out offering social media management for small businesses, but now we provide comprehensive brand strategy and digital presence management for companies ranging from startups to established retail chains. We just signed a contract with. Amanda plays around on Instagram for little online shops. My mother interjected with a dismissive wave. Nothing like your important research, Rachel. Tell us more about this trial your team is conducting. And, just like that, I was erased again. I saw Rachel's brow furrow slightly. But she was too polite to contradict her future mother-in-law at their first formal meeting. She answered my mother's question while giving me an apologetic glance. As the main course was served, I fell into my familiar role of quiet competence. I passed dishes, refilled water glasses, and responded to the occasional direct question with brief, pleasant answers. Years of these dinners had taught me to make myself useful but unobtrusive, to manage my expectations and protect my heart. I watched Rachel observing the family dynamic with increasing clarity in her eyes. Once, when my mother spoke over me for the third time, I caught Rachel's slight frown. When my father referred to me as our artistic one, with a tone that made it clear this wasn't a compliment, I saw Rachel's eyebrows raise. She was seeing the pattern, connecting dots that Thomas had never bothered to acknowledge. As the dinner progressed, I felt the familiar ache of invisibility settling into my chest. I had built a life I was proud of, one that would impress most people, yet in this house, I might as well have been unemployed. The contrast between my professional confidence and my family role was jarring. Outside these walls, people valued my opinion, sought my expertise, paid substantial sums for my insight. Here, I couldn't even finish describing my business without being interrupted. The irony wasn't lost on me. My success had come partly from my ability to help brands be seen in a crowded marketplace, yet I couldn't manage to be truly seen by my own family. The conversation shifted as the main course was cleared and servers brought out fresh wine. My father, loosened by several glasses of his expensive Cabernet, turned the topic to careers. Thomas just closed a deal that increased the firm's portfolio by $30 million, he announced proudly, clapping my brother on the shoulder. Youngest senior associate to bring in a client that size. Thomas smiled modestly. It was a team effort, Dad. Nonsense. Johnson told me himself they signed because of you. That's leadership. My mother turned to Rachel. And Rachel's research team was just awarded a major grant, wasn't it, dear? Rachel nodded. Yes, we received NIH funding to continue our clinical trials. It's very exciting to see years of work moving forward. That's what happens when you pursue a proper education and a real career, my mother said with a pointed glance in my direction. I took another sip of wine, feeling the familiar tightness in my chest. Rachel's work is saving lives, my Aunt Julia chimed in. Such important research. I think all work has value. Rachel replied, glancing at me. Different fields contribute to society in different ways. I appreciated her attempt at inclusivity, but it was quickly undermined. Speaking of work, my Uncle Gerald said, turning to me with the air of someone remembering a child who's been quiet too long. What are you up to these days, Amanda? Still doing that computer thing? All eyes turned to me, and I felt my cheeks warm. This was the moment in family gatherings I dreaded most, when my work became a topic for dismissal rather than discussion. Yes, I said, keeping my voice steady. My agency continues to grow. We recently signed a contract with Evans Beauty, which is a major milestone. They're a nationwide brand looking to rebuild their digital strategy and… Evans, my father interrupted. Isn't that the makeup company with the pink packaging? Thomas. Didn't you date a girl who used their products? Thomas looked uncomfortable for the first time that evening. Dad, Amanda's trying to tell us about her business. Business is a rather grand word for playing on the computer all day, my father said with a chuckle. But we're proud she's keeping herself busy. Several relatives laughed. I gripped my wine glass tighter. I'm sure Amanda works very hard, Rachel said, her voice kind but firm. Oh, I don't doubt she spends hours on those social media sites. My mother said with a dismissive wave. But it's hardly the same as what you and Thomas do. She's just a nobody in that internet thing she does. The table erupted in laughter, except for Rachel, who looked increasingly uncomfortable, and to my surprise, Thomas, who had finally noticed his fiancée's reaction. Each laugh felt like a small knife between my ribs. I'd faced criticism and rejection plenty of times in business, had pitched to clients who said no, had launched campaigns that underperformed. But nothing cut quite like family dismissal. I felt my face flush hot then cold. My fingers numbed around my glass stem. A rushing sound filled my ears as I fought to maintain composure. I was transported back to every childhood moment when my interests were deemed unimportant, when my approaches to problems were considered wrong rather than different, when my strengths were framed as weaknesses. The urge to stand up and leave was nearly overwhelming. I could make an excuse, pretend an emergency with a client, escape to my apartment where my accomplishments line the walls in the form of awards, press mentions, and thank you notes from clients whose businesses I had helped transform. Instead, I sat frozen, a spectator to my own humiliation. I had come tonight out of family obligation, perhaps with a small, foolish hope that things might be different. That the addition of Rachel might somehow change the dynamic. Now I just wanted to get through dinner without breaking down. Amanda's always been in her own little world, my mother continued, apparently not noticing or caring about my distress. When she was little, she'd set up these pretend shops in her room. So cute. She never grew out of playing store. More laughter. The room seemed to shrink around me. Thomas cleared his throat. Mom, I think. Now, about the wedding, my mother interrupted, mercifully changing the subject. Rachel, have you thought about venues? I have some wonderful connections at the Boston Harbor Hotel. As the conversation shifted to wedding plans, I excused myself to use the restroom. In the privacy of the powder room, I stared at my reflection, a successful businesswoman on the verge of tears at a family dinner. The absurdity wasn't lost on me. Pull it together, I whispered to myself. 2 more hours, then you can leave. I splashed cold water on my wrists, a trick I'd learned to calm myself before important presentations. Taking several deep breaths, I reapplied my lipstick and returned to the dining room just as dessert was being served. Rachel gave me a small, sympathetic smile as I took my seat. In that moment, I felt seen in a way I rarely did in this house, and it was by someone who had just met me. The irony was both comforting and painful. The dessert, my mother's famous chocolate mousse, was served with coffee. Thomas and my father were deep in conversation about golf courses near Thomas's new condo. My mother was showing my aunt pictures of potential wedding flowers on her iPad. I sat quietly, counting the minutes until I could politely leave. I didn't realize then that the entire dynamic of the evening, and possibly my relationship with my family, was about to shift dramatically. As coffee cups were being refilled and the chocolate mousse was dwindling on plates, a natural lull fell over the dinner conversation. Wedding discussions had temporarily exhausted themselves after covering venues, dates, flowers, and the guest list size. In this momentary quiet, Rachel deliberately turned toward me. "Amanda," she said clearly, drawing the table's attention, "you mentioned your company earlier. I'd love to hear more about it. What's the name of your business?" My mother made a small dismissive sound. "Rachel, dear, you don't have to be polite. We know Amanda's little website isn't as interesting as medical research." Rachel's smile remained fixed, but something shifted in her eyes. "I'm genuinely interested," she said, her tone pleasant but firm. "Digital marketing is fascinating in today's business environment." My father reached for the wine bottle. "Speaking of business, Thomas, tell everyone about that new client from Singapore." "Actually," Rachel said, with a polite but unmistakable interruption, "I'd really like to hear about Amanda's work first." The table fell silent. No one ever redirected conversation away from Thomas in this house. Thomas looked at his fiancée with surprise, then gave me an encouraging nod. "Yeah, sis. Tell us about the company. I don't think I've ever even seen your website." Feeling like I'd stepped into an alternate reality, I cleared my throat. "It's called Spectrum Digital Solutions. We focus on comprehensive digital strategy for businesses looking to expand their online presence or reposition their brand." Rachel nodded thoughtfully. "Do you have a website where we can see your work?" "Yes, spectrumdigitalsolutions.com, I replied, still uncertain where this was going. Without hesitation, Rachel pulled her phone from her purse and began typing. "I hope you don't mind if I look it up. I always like to see examples of good design." My mother sighed dramatically. "Rachel, there's no need to humor her. We could discuss your honeymoon destinations instead." Rachel didn't look up from her phone. "This will just take a minute," she said, scrolling through what I assumed was my company's homepage. Then her expression changed, eyebrows rising as she continued to read. "Thomas," she said, turning the phone toward my brother. "Did you know about this?" Thomas leaned over to look at the screen, his forehead creasing in confusion, then surprise. "Wait, what? Is this right?" "What is it?" my father asked, irritation evident in his voice at not being the center of attention. Rachel looked up at me, then back at the phone. "According to your website, Spectrum Digital Solutions has worked with Nordstrom, Target, and Evans Beauty. And there's a Forbes logo here that says featured in." She scrolled further. "There's also a Meet the Team page that shows 14 employees." The silence that fell over the table was different from any I'd experienced before in this house. It wasn't the quiet of being ignored, but the stunned silence of recalibration. "Let me see that," my mother said, reaching for Rachel's phone with an expression of disbelief. Rachel handed it over, and my mother's eyes widened as she scrolled through the site. My father leaned over her shoulder, his expression shifting from dismissal to confusion. "There must be some mistake," my mother said. "Amanda, is this really your company?" Before I could answer, my Aunt Julia had taken the phone. It says here you were named one of Boston's 40 under 40 business leaders last year. And you gave a keynote address at the National Marketing Association conference? The phone continued its journey around the table, each relative discovering some new aspect of my professional life that had been completely unknown to them. It says here you have an office in downtown Boston with harbor views, my Uncle Gerald said, sounding genuinely impressed. And satellite locations in New York and Chicago? Thomas was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between shock and newfound respect. Amanda, why didn't you ever tell us? The question hung in the air, heavy with years of dismissal and interruption. Why hadn't I told them? The answer was sitting all around this table, in every person who had never bothered to truly listen when I tried to speak about my work. I did try, I said quietly. Many times. Rachel had reclaimed her phone and was still reading. According to this industry publication, she said, Spectrum Digital Solutions increased revenue by 300% last year and is projected to hit 8 figures this year. And you were quoted in the Wall Street Journal last month about digital strategy for retail brands. My father cleared his throat. Is this accurate, Amanda? All eyes were on me now, really seeing me perhaps for the first time. The power dynamic had shifted so suddenly I felt almost dizzy with it. Yes, I said simply. That's all accurate. But this is... My mother began, seemingly unable to find the right words. Impressive, Rachel finished for her. Extremely impressive. Thomas was shaking his head slowly. I had no idea, sis. I mean, I knew you had your own business, but I thought it was something small. Why didn't you make a bigger deal about all this? The question was genuine, without his usual condescension. For the first time in my adult life, my brother was looking at me as an equal, maybe even someone to be admired. I stopped talking about my work when it became clear no one was interested, I said, trying to keep bitterness from my voice. After a while, it seemed easier to let everyone believe what they wanted to believe. But this changes everything, my mother said, gesturing toward Rachel's phone as if it contained revelations from on high. You're not just... I mean, this is a real business. It always was, I replied softly. From day one. Evans Beauty. My father mused. Isn't their CEO Patrick Evans? I met him at a charity function last year. Impressive fellow. Yes, I confirmed. I've been working directly with Patrick on their digital transformation. That's the contract I was trying to tell you about earlier. The atmosphere in the room had transformed completely. Where there had been dismissal, there was now attention. Where there had been condescension, there was now respect. All because someone had taken 30 seconds to Google my company name. Rachel was still asking questions, but now they were substantive inquiries about business strategy and growth plans. For the first time at a family dinner, I was being asked to share my expertise rather than hide it. What's your approach to TikTok for traditional retail brands? She asked, genuinely interested. My lab has been considering how to use social media to recruit for clinical trials. As I answered Rachel's questions, I noticed my relatives leaning forward, listening attentively. Even my father seemed engrossed in my explanation of how we'd helped a century-old brand connect with Gen Z consumers. Thomas kept shaking his head in amazement. I can't believe my little sister is a secret business mogul, he said, but his tone was warm with newfound admiration. My mother, always quick to adapt to new social situations, was already shifting her narrative. Amanda has always been so independent, she told Rachel, determined to make her own way. The conversation continued to revolve around my business, with relatives asking increasingly detailed questions. My uncle wanted to know about profit margins in digital marketing. My aunt was curious about how I'd built my team. My grandfather, who had barely spoken to me all evening, suddenly remembered I'd tried to explain my business to him at Christmas last year. I thought you just posted pictures on the internet, he admitted. I had no idea you were running a whole company. Through it all, Rachel watched with observant eyes, occasionally glancing between family members as if cataloging their shifting behaviors. When our gazes met across the table, she gave me a small, knowing smile. The dinner that had begun with my humiliation had transformed into something I'd never experienced before. A family gathering where my achievements were recognized and valued. All because one person had bothered to look beyond the family mythology to see who I really was. An awkward silence eventually settled over the table as the initial shock wore off. My mother, never one to sit with uncomfortable feelings, attempted to rewrite history on the spot. "We've always been so proud of Amanda's entrepreneurial spirit," she said, smiling broadly. "I tell all my friends about her creative business approach." The claim was so blatantly false that I couldn't let it pass. 10 years of swallowed responses rose to the surface. "Mom," I said calmly, 20 minutes ago you called me just a nobody in that internet thing I do. You've never once asked for details about my business in all the years I've been building it." My mother's smile faltered. "Well, I didn't mean that literally. It was just a little joke." "It wasn't funny," Rachel said quietly. All eyes turned to her. My mother looked startled that her future daughter-in-law would contradict her. "I'm sorry," my mother said. "It wasn't a joke," Rachel repeated, her voice gentle but firm. "It was dismissive of Amanda's work, which is clearly exceptional. And from what I've observed tonight, it's part of a pattern." The room fell silent again. Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his chair. My father cleared his throat. "Now, let's not make too much of dinner table conversation. Amanda, your business sounds quite successful. What's your annual revenue these days?" The question was asked with new respect, but still reflected his values, measuring worth in dollars. 10 years ago, I would have eagerly shared the numbers, desperate for his approval. Tonight, I chose a different approach. Our financial performance has been strong enough to open 3 offices, hire 14 full-time employees, and allow me to be selective about which clients we take on. I replied evenly. But more importantly, we've helped dozens of businesses transform their digital presence and connect meaningfully with their customers. Rachel nodded appreciatively at my response. "I'd love to hear more about your creative process. How do you develop strategies for such different types of businesses?" As I explained our approach to Rachel, I noticed my family members listening with new attention. Thomas was watching me with an expression that shifted between surprise and what looked like regret. "You really know your stuff," he said when I finished explaining our methodology. "I had no idea you were operating at this level, Amanda. I feel like I've missed something important about my own sister's life." His admission cracked something open in me. "You have," I said simply. "All of you have. I've been trying to share my professional journey for years, but no one in this family has been interested enough to listen." "That's not fair," my father protested. "We've always asked about your work. You've asked superficial questions and then interrupted before I could fully answer," I countered. "Last Thanksgiving, I tried to tell you about the Evans partnership, and Mom immediately changed the subject to Thomas's potential promotion." My mother flushed. "I don't recall that at all." "It happened," Thomas confirmed, surprising me with his support. "I remember because I felt awkward about it, but I didn't say anything." He turned to me. "I'm sorry, sis. I should have made space for you to share your news." His apology, perhaps the first genuine one I'd received in this house, momentarily took my breath away. "The thing is," I continued, finding my voice again, "this pattern has existed my entire life. My interests, my approaches, my definitions of success have always been treated as less valuable than Thomas's. It's not his fault." I added quickly, seeing my brother's expression fall. "It's a family dynamic we all participated in." "I don't think that's quite fair," my father said, but with less conviction than usual. "It's exactly what I've observed just in the few hours I've been here," Rachel said. "Amanda has been interrupted, talked over, and dismissed repeatedly. When she's tried to share information about her work, the conversation has been redirected to Thomas or another topic." My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "We're very proud of both our children. But you show that pride very differently," Rachel noted. "And now it turns out Amanda has built something remarkable, largely without your knowledge or support." Thomas put his hand over Rachel's. "She's right, Dad. We've all been pretty oblivious." My mother dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. "Well, if Amanda had just been more insistent about telling us." I said, years of hurt evident in my voice despite my efforts to remain calm. Every time I tried to share my successes, they were minimized or ignored. After a while, It seemed pointless to keep trying. We just wanted security for you, my mother said defensively. Thomas followed a traditional path with predictable outcomes. Your choice seemed so risky. It was, I acknowledged. But it was my risk to take. And it paid off in ways that aren't just financial. I've built something I'm proud of, something that reflects my values and vision. And clearly, you've been extremely successful at it, Rachel added supportively. My father, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. I suppose we owe you an apology, Amanda. I may have underestimated what you were building. Coming from my father. This was the equivalent of a dramatic mea culpa. I felt a tightness in my chest begin to loosen. The conversation continued, more measured now, as family members asked more thoughtful questions about my business journey. My aunt admitted she'd never really understood what digital marketing entailed. My uncle acknowledged he'd assumed my business was a small side project. Even my grandfather expressed genuine interest in how online advertising worked. As dessert plates were cleared and coffee was served, I felt both emotionally drained and strangely liberated. Years of suppressed frustration had finally found voice. And while nothing was fully resolved, at least the reality had been named. When the evening finally wound down, I decided to leave rather than linger for after-dinner drinks. The emotional toll of the night had left me exhausted, and I needed space to process what had happened. As I gathered my coat and purse, Rachel and Thomas walked me to the door. Thank you, I said to Rachel once we were in the foyer, away from the others. For actually Googling my company. For seeing me. She smiled warmly. I should be thanking you for being so gracious in an incredibly frustrating situation. I'm sorry if I overstepped by speaking up. You didn't, I assured her. It was refreshing to have someone notice the dynamic. Thomas looked genuinely remorseful. I'm sorry, Amanda. I never realized how you were being treated. Or maybe I did, and it was just easier not to rock the boat. It's okay, I said, though we both knew it wasn't entirely. It's a start that we're talking about it now. I'd love to hear more about your business sometime, Rachel said. Maybe we could have lunch, just the two of us. I'd like that, I replied, surprised to find I genuinely meant it. As I drove away from my parents' house, the emotional whiplash of the evening hit me full force. In the space of a few hours, I'd gone from invisible to the center of attention. From dismissed to respected, all because someone had taken the time to see beyond the family narrative. I felt vindicated, but also sad for all the years of connection lost to misunderstanding and dismissal. As the city lights came into view, I realized that tonight had changed something fundamental in my relationship with my family. Whether that change would lead to healing or further distance remained to be seen. The drive home from my parents' house that night felt surreal. After years of invisibility, I had been seen, truly seen, for the first time. The revelation of my success had shocked my family into a new awareness, but I knew one dinner couldn't erase decades of established patterns. Change, if it came at all, would be gradual and uncertain. Over the next few days, I processed the emotional aftermath while managing my usual workload. Part of me wanted to retreat back into the comfortable separation I'd maintained between my family life and professional identity. It had been painful but predictable. Now we were in uncharted territory. 3 days after the dinner, I received a text from Rachel. Would love to grab coffee this week if you're free. No family members allowed. We met at a quiet cafe near my office. Rachel was just as impressive one-on-one as she had been at dinner, sharp and observant, but also genuinely kind. I want to apologize again if I overstepped, she said once we had our drinks. I know family dynamics are complicated. You have nothing to apologize for, I assured her. If anything, I should thank you for disrupting a pattern no one else seemed willing to acknowledge. Rachel smiled. Thomas has been doing a lot of thinking since Sunday. He feels terrible about how oblivious he's been. It's not entirely his fault, I said, surprising myself with the generosity. Our parents established the dynamic when we were kids. He was just playing the role assigned to him, same as I was. Still, he wants to do better. He called me at midnight last night after finding an article about you in Business Insider that he'd never seen before. He couldn't believe he didn't know about his own sister being profiled in a major publication. The mention of Thomas's midnight revelation touched me. Perhaps he truly was beginning to see the extent of his blindness. 2 days later, my brother called. The conversation was awkward at first, both of us navigating unfamiliar emotional territory. "I've been doing some thinking," he said after initial pleasantries. "And some research. I read everything I could find about Spectrum online. Amanda, what you've built is incredible." "Thank you," I said simply. "I don't know how to apologize for years of not seeing what was right in front of me," he continued. "But I want to try. I've been self-absorbed and oblivious. I never questioned why Mom and Dad treated us so differently, because it benefited me." His honesty was unexpected and moving. "I appreciate that, Thomas. Really. Rachel's helped me see things differently," he admitted. "She pointed out patterns I never noticed before. It's been uncomfortable but necessary." We talked for nearly an hour, more openly than we had in years. He asked thoughtful questions about my business journey, the challenges I'd faced, the victories I'd celebrated alone. I found myself sharing things I'd kept private for so long, testing the waters of a new kind of sibling relationship. My parents were slower to adjust. A week after the dinner, my mother called. "I was telling Barbara at the club about your internet company," she said, an attempt at connection that still missed the mark in its diminishing language. She was very impressed when I mentioned the Evans contract. It was a small step, her attempt to showcase my achievements to her friends, even if she still didn't fully understand what I did. I accepted it as the beginning of a shift, however imperfect. My father's approach came in the form of a forwarded email 2 weeks later. "Saw this in the Wall Street Journal," his brief message read. "Your company was mentioned in their technology section. Well done." The acknowledgement was minimal by most standards, but from my father, it represented a significant concession. I replied with a simple thank you, resisting the urge to point out that this was my third mention in the publication that year. As weeks passed, I established clear boundaries about how I would engage with my family going forward. I declined a dinner invitation that conflicted with an important client meeting, something I would have rearranged in the past to avoid family disapproval. I sent Thomas and my father articles about my industry that I thought might interest them, no longer hiding my professional knowledge. Most significantly, I developed an unexpected friendship with Rachel. We met regularly for coffee or lunch, conversations flowing easily between personal and professional topics. She understood family complexity from her own experience and offered perspective without judgment. "The question now," she said during one of our lunches, "is how much you want to let them in. You've built a life apart from their understanding or approval. You don't owe them access to it." Her observation was astute. I had protected my professional self for so long that sharing it now felt vulnerable in a new way. Did I want my family involved in this part of my life? Could I trust them not to diminish it now that its value was more apparent to them? I decided to take small steps. When I won an industry award the following month, I sent a group text with a photo from the ceremony. The responses were encouraging, if still evolving. My mother asked if I'd worn the blue dress she liked. My father wanted to know if there was a monetary prize. But Thomas sent a genuinely proud message, and several relatives who had been at the dinner reached out with congratulations. Rachel and Thomas invited me to dinner at their place, where Thomas showed me he'd framed an article about my company for his office. "So I can brag about my sister to clients," he explained. A reversal of roles that would have been unimaginable months earlier. Perhaps the most profound change came in my own sense of self. For years, I had compartmentalized my life, accepting that my family would never truly see or value my professional achievements. That separation had protected me but also reinforced a painful division in my identity. Now, as the walls began to thin between these worlds, I found myself more integrated, more whole. 6 months after the dinner that changed everything, my parents attended an open house at my company's expanded Boston office. They were awkward and clearly out of their element, but they came. My mother complimented the harbor view with genuine appreciation. My father shook hands with my team members and asked semi-appropriate questions about the business. When a major client stopped by and spoke highly of my work, I watched my parents' expressions shift from politeness to authentic pride. That evening, as I drove home to my apartment, I reflected on the journey. The pain of years of dismissal hadn't disappeared, but it had lost some of its sharp edges. I had stopped seeking validation I might never fully receive and instead accepted the complicated, imperfect reality of family relationships. The truth was, I had built my success without their understanding or support. Their newfound recognition didn't make my achievements more real or valuable. What had changed was that I no longer felt I had to choose between being successful and being seen by my family. I could be both, even if the seeing was still partial and evolving. If there was a lesson in all of this, perhaps it was that our worth isn't determined by those who should love us best, but often don't. Sometimes recognition comes from unexpected sources, like a future sister-in-law with the curiosity to look beyond family narratives. Sometimes we have to build lives that fulfill us regardless of whether those closest to us understand the journey. And sometimes, just sometimes, people can surprise us with their capacity to see us anew, to revise long-held assumptions, to make space for realities that contradict their comfortable beliefs. I don't know what my relationship with my family will look like in 5 years or 10. What I do know is that I no longer need their validation to feel whole. My success is mine, whether they fully recognize it or not. And that knowledge has been the most healing gift of all. Thank you all for listening to my story today. I'm curious. Have you ever had a moment when someone finally saw your true value after years of being underestimated? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by family recognition. Remember, sometimes the people who should see us most clearly are the ones who miss who we truly are, but that doesn't make your journey any less valuable or your success any less real.